Welcome to Wealth and Means. Advice dressed up like hard work.
And now for the greater debate. This is the debate that clears dinner tables. The one that makes people put their phones face down and lean back. Not because they're bored, but because they can feel the ground moving under their assumptions. Tonight's question sounds simple, almost binary. Should the United States participate in a joint strike designed to decapitate the Iranian regime and create the conditions for its collapse? But beneath that question sits another, older one that has haunted republics since Rome first mistook expansion for destiny. Are we guardians of our own character or guarantors of universal freedom? Two lecterns, no slides, no moderator to rescue anyone from the consequences of their own logic. At the first stands John Quincy Adams, 6th President, architect of the Monroe Doctrine, a man who believed America's power was best expressed not through dominion but through example. A scholar-statesman who warned that if the Republic went abroad in search of monsters, it might find something else entirely, an empire staring back at itself. At the second, Christopher Hitchens, journalist, contrarian, unapologetic interventionist when it came to totalitarian theocracy. A man who believed that neutrality in the face of barbarism is not prudence, but complicity. If Adams feared empire, Hitchens feared surrender, to clerical fascism, to nihilism dressed as faith, to regimes that export terror as policy. Adams begins without raising his voice. He looks almost pained. He says the plumes of smoke over Tehran do not trouble him for the tyrants targeted, but for the republic that launched the missiles. He reminds the room that America's greatness was never meant to be measured in the radius of its airstrikes, but in the radius of its example. Once a nation declares itself responsible for restructuring the internal politics of another, he argues, its own political center of gravity shifts. Force becomes normalized, executive power expands, fear becomes a permanent advisor. You do not simply remove a foreign despot, you rearrange your own constitutional architecture. There's a murmur at that. He continues. Liberty cannot be delivered by foreign ordinance. It must be won by those who will live under it. When leaders in Washington and Jerusalem say, "Now is your moment, rise up," they assume a people can step seamlessly from fear into governance. History suggests otherwise. Remove a regime without an indigenous replacement ready to consolidate power, and you do not get freedom. You get fragmentation, militias, factionalism, a vacuum that does not remain empty for long. He does not deny the brutality of the Iranian regime. He questions whether an externally triggered collapse produces a republic or merely chaos with new uniforms. Hitchens smiles thinly before responding. He does not dismiss Adams, he reframes him. He says this is the luxury of distance talking. The Iranian regime is not a domestic eccentricity. It is an exporter of violence. It funds proxies, arms militias, issues fatwas that cross borders, and suppresses its own people with medieval cruelty. This is not a contained tyranny. It is an expansionist theocracy. To treat it as a sovereign inconvenience is to ignore decades of aggression. The monster has not been sought out, he argues. It has announced itself. He leans in. There's a moral asymmetry here. When a regime hangs dissidents and crushes women protesting for basic dignity, neutrality is not restraint, it is abandonment. The idea that oppressed people must organically generate their own liberation while we watch from a safe philosophical perch begins to look less like prudence and more like indifference. Removing the regime's coercive core, its revolutionary guard, its leadership, its command structure, is not installing democracy. It is removing the boot from the throat. The Iranian people have shown repeatedly that the desire for freedom exists. The obstacle is organized violence. Eliminate the obstacle. The room tightens. Adams returns, this time sharper. You speak of surgery, he says, but surgery requires knowledge of the patient's underlying systems. The United States has a long record of believing that removing a malignant ruler automatically produces healthy institutions. It rarely does. Power abhors a vacuum. If the Iranian regime collapses overnight, who secures nuclear materials? Who prevents splinter factions from igniting civil war? Who arbitrates between Persians, Kurds, Azeris, Baluchis, each with distinct grievances? A strike may begin as targeted, but the aftermath is never surgical. And when instability spreads, who owns it? The nation that struck. He lands his first real blow. If we define our national interest as the destruction of every totalitarian regime, we commit ourselves to perpetual war. There will always be another. The republic becomes habituated to intervention. Military budgets swell, emergency powers linger. The character of the citizen changes from participant to spectator of distant conflicts. You may topple a tyrant abroad, he says, but you may simultaneously erode the restraints that protect liberty at home. There's silence after that. Hitchens does not flinch. He concedes a point. Intervention has consequences. Nation building is notoriously clumsy, but he pivots. The cost of inaction must also be counted. A nuclear-armed theocracy with apocalyptic theology is not a manageable status quo. Deterrence works on actors who value survival. What of those who sanctify martyrdom? Waiting for organic change while centrifuges spin is not prudence. It is gambling with catastrophe. You warn of empire, he says. I warn of annihilation. He delivers his knockout calmly. The argument that intervention corrupts the republic assumes that restraint preserves it. But what if restraint signals weakness? What if adversaries interpret non-intervention not as virtue but as exhaustion? A free society that will not defend itself or its allies eventually ceases to be free. There is a difference between imperial adventurism and targeted defense of civilization's basic premises. The regime in Tehran has declared its hostility not just to Israel or the United States, but to the very idea of secular governance. To dismantle it is not empire, it is self-preservation. You can feel the room split. Adams answers without heat. He acknowledges that some threats are real and that naivete is not policy, but he insists on hierarchy. The first duty of a republic is to its own constitutional health. If intervention becomes reflexive, the exception becomes the norm. Wars begun for moral clarity often end in strategic ambiguity. You may remove one tyrant, but the precedent you establish, preemptive decapitation, regime destabilization, will be cited by others. Great powers learn from each other. If we justify this doctrine, we cannot be shocked when rivals adopt it. Now it is Hitchens who pauses. He admits something rarely admitted in these arguments. Intervention can unleash forces no planner fully controls. Revolutions devour their architects. There is no guarantee that a post-theocratic Iran would be liberal, stable, or friendly. The Iranian people might surprise us in ways both hopeful and unsettling, but uncertainty is not an argument for paralysis. Every consequential decision carries risk. The question is comparative risk, the instability of change versus the metastasis of tyranny left intact. The late-stage pressure is no longer rhetorical, it is existential. Adams warns that a republic that constantly wages moral war eventually confuses power with virtue. Hitchens warns that a republic unwilling to confront fanatical regimes eventually confuses caution with wisdom. And then something rare. Both men step back from their lecterns, intellectually if not physically. Adams concedes that there are moments when the defense of the republic may require force beyond its borders. He is not advocating pacifism. He is pleading for discipline, an understanding that every external action reshapes the internal soul of the nation. Hitchens concedes that moral clarity can become moral arrogance, that believing oneself the custodian of universal liberty can slide into self-righteousness. Intervention must be argued, scrutinized, justified, not assumed. The audience exhales. No one has been caricatured. No one has been dismissed as naive or bloodthirsty. Two visions of responsibility remain standing. One says, guard the republic's character above all, for once lost, it cannot be reclaimed by foreign victories. The other says, confront regimes that seek to extinguish freedom, or watch them grow bolder while you recite principles. The strikes over Tehran are real. The regime may wobble, the Iranian people may rise, or they may fracture. The American Republic will also absorb the consequences, visible and invisible. There is no applause line, only tension that lingers, the kind that follows you on a long walk home. And that is the greater debate. Until next time, stay curious.
Stay kind.
And keep compounding.